My name's Kerry Chave, and I'm here with Pam and Joan as part of Spiral, and we're just having a conversation about how Spiral began in those early days. So I'll just ask you to introduce yourself, please.
I'm Pam Trevor, and I've been involved with Spiral ever since it began because I have a disabled son with Down syndrome, and was happy to know that there was going to be some sort of a care day for people that couldn't attend the other facilities that were available.
How long ago was that?
That was about when my son left school and went off to the Endeavour Training Centre, and would have been about 1981.
Joan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Joan van der Vliet, and a similar situation and way to Pam, we'd worked and helped Endeavour as volunteers at the school, and then it was very much aware to us that there were some older folks there that were caring for their disabled son or daughter with high needs, and they were very much trying to get the government to come on board and provide some services. And they held a public meeting in the CWA hall, and I think Gordon Simpson was at that meeting, and his secretary, Olive Eastlake, who was a very good friend of one of the families, and they just asked those of us who'd been working and known them quite well, and would we be interested in giving them some support.
Did you know many families in the area with
high needs?
With high needs,
yeah.
At that time?
There were. Pam probably might have even known a few more than I did, but there were those that were able to get to what Endeavour had been able to service them until their children were probably 18 years of age. But there are many others then in the country around, like Mullaney and in Kenilworth and areas like that, and Palmwoods, that didn't have access to services, and so more or less had cared for those folks at home all their lives.
And both of you would have been in that situation prior to Endeavour coming around. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, what it was like for you as a family, and how much support there possibly was?
Well, I'll start in the Pam. I was going to say, Pam would be earlier than me, so Pam could possibly.
I was very fortunate that I attended a meeting when our son was only about 2, and I think a school had already started or was about to start, and by the time he was 4 or a little bit older, he was able to go to that school.
That's great. And how many other students were at the school?
Probably about 20 or more.
Was this a special needs school?
I think it was just, might have been run by Endeavour. It wasn't called Endeavour then, of course. It was this Queensland Subnormal
Children's Association.
Yes.
And Joan?
Well, we were in Brisbane, and my husband was transferred up in 1972. And one of the reasons we accepted the transfer was the fact that we had come up and done some homework and found Sylvania School, which was a lovely little brick school that was built by Endeavour, was operating for those children like our Down syndrome fellow. And so he was 1 year in school in Brisbane, and then we transferred up here. Yes.
So this was the early 70s?
That was 72 we came up, but the school would have been there. You remember when it was opened?
Ashley would have gone to school about 1968, 69.
Was Sylvania there then, Pam, or was it in another building?
It was a little building up behind the Nambour Hospital, and I don't know how long it was operating there, but I just can't remember the year that the new Sylvania School was all opened, and it was all moved down to there.
Was the Sylvania School near the Nambour Hospital? Did it have affiliations with the Nambour Hospital?
No. It was just that there were these vacant houses, and that weren't being used, and they used it for the school. There were 2 buildings I can remember, and I used to take Ashley there. He started off half a day a week until it increased, until he was there eventually 5 days a week.
At what age was he there? About 5 days a week?
He probably would have been 5 then, but he was still only 4 when he first started.
What was it like in terms of support? Was the hospital support? Was there a facility at the hospital that was supportive of parents and families with disability?
No, I don't really think it had anything to do with the hospital, but and I don't know who you'd ask to find out. I just was very grateful that Ashley was able to go to school. It was wonderful. My other children were already at school.
I think that in even those early days there was a nucleus of a committee of Queensland subnormal children's up here. There were family-based. And they were the ones then that were probably even then hoping that there'd be something. So they were working on that level. And I suppose like when a small country town like this, if there's somewhere that you can use a facility, and the hospital might have said, I don't know, I'm just assuming this was before our time, well, this building is available, you're welcome to use it until other arrangements. I don't know, do you think?
There was a really wonderful fellow, Al Clark, who was very instrumental in getting the school up and running those days.
Is he still around
No,
now?
he passed away last year.
Mm-hmm. And was he also a parent?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So there was a general knowledge of each other, I suppose, in the area. Where did you get together as a group, and how did you get together?
I probably wasn't involved with the parents that would have been involved then. I came along a little bit later. But once our children were at school, we had a group of mothers that got together.
We'd meet once a month. And usually it was often it was in what they had started little group homes by that time, Endeavour. We weren't involved in the running of any of this or organising it, but they had started little group homes where those who lived like Glass House or up on the range the children could come and board in the younger hostels, the first hostels, and go to the school. And so there was a nucleus there of one hostel, I know, possibly. How early did Ashley come into the hostel? It would have been.
He didn't go into a hostel until he went to the training centre
right.
when he was 19.
Yeah. And then once that was there, then the mothers, we did a lot of fundraising.
Just put a pause.
Put a pause.
I did want to find out, if possible, what conditions your children actually have. What were they born?
Yeah, Bradley and Ashley have Down syndrome, which is a chromosome imbalance in the brain area, and the way it's explained to me, and Pam can perhaps correct me on this, is 23 chromosomes in both the mother and the father. And then in Down syndrome, there's an extra chromosome, and it causes Down syndrome. Now, it has got a certain name. Do you remember, Pam? One particular of the...
What were some of the challenges that brought as a family? Maybe Pam?
Of course, it was a terrible shock to begin with, but as the years move on, it enhances your life.
Joan?
Yes, well, it's something which the doctor will have 2 older children and comes in and tells you. And thankfully, Bradley was born at the Royal Brisbane Women's, and the specialist said these children get on wonderfully well at home. And until then, or about that time, a lot of the parents were advised that you could just put this child into a home, into the state system, and you virtually forget about them. Well, that wasn't any thinking in our way. This is our child. And at that time, there was a change, beginning to be a shift, that how wonderfully well they were able to be a normal part of a normal family, and we were very encouraged with that, and we didn't hesitate from that. But until that was around that time that I believe one of the comments I heard then was that it was a Professor Rendell Short came from England and headed up the department at the university in the medical school training, and then there was an about-face to the attitude towards those with a disability.
We're talking late 70s, early
Probably
80s?
Would be about the late 60s, early 70s, I'd say.
And what was your understanding of that state system, of that institutionalisation, I suppose you could call it? Was there any thoughts about it? How much were you aware of it? And you did mention it just then, Joan. I'm just wondering why you chose not to go down that path.
Well, Pam was in the country. See, we were in the city, so it may have been.
Well, when Ashley was born, we weren't sure what was wrong with him until we went to... he was born up at the public hospital, and we took him to a private doctor who sent us to Dr. Felix Arden in Brisbane, who diagnosed Ashley as Down syndrome. And he just said, take him home. Felix Arden said, take him home and treat him like your other boys, which is what we did.
So it wasn't even a consideration, state system for you? Joan?
Well, because we were in the public hospital in Brisbane, or the main hospital, the specialist was a fellow called Dr. Grantley Staple, and he just told us, this is a decision I have to tell you, but it might not necessarily, be where you want to hesitate, yeah. And he said to us, I need to tell you this because this is just one of the procedures that they form parents, that you can, let your child go into the state system, and then more or less, it's not your responsibility anymore, which was certainly not in our thinking anyway. And he said, and I said, what would happen? We've got 2 older children, and we're being fair to them to take Bradley home. And he said, by all means, they get on wonderfully well in the home situation. Well, then it just was not a consideration, and it just didn't go any further. And we've just, worked through with this. At the time, we also knew, and then they sent us from the hospital and recommended we go to the Queensland Subnormal Children Association. The main head office was at Bowen Hills, and we went there when Brad was quite young. And they then advised that when he got to school age, it'd be this, this and this. Mm-hmm. There was not any early intervention then, like there is now. There's the Early Intervention Centre just down the road here. And yeah, that would have given extra physio, and it would have given extra speech therapy and that. But those sort of things weren't available to us.
So were you two part of that initiating into those programs to start with? Was it?
They were there. We were just directed there from Queensland Subnormal Children's. I don't know how it was for Pam.
The school was already well established by the time Ashley went.
So when you say the school, I'm just trying to bring it back to Spiral. Was this the beginning of Spiral?
No.
School? Okay. So let's just focus for a moment on Spiral.
That's what I thought.
We'll bring it back to there. So the Baptist Church, I believe, was the first place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, could you just talk about how Spiral started, what your involvement was, and we'll start with you, Pam.
Yeah. No, hang on, okay. Well, I've got this in front of me, and I was rather glad I found this because this was a contract re special needs for special care group. That's what it was called originally. Now, from the public meeting with the department, those group of parents kept going to local members, to state members in Brisbane. Was part of the health department then, called Intellectual Handicap Services. So they were sort of pushing for some sort of respite, not considering school because by then Endeavour Foundation had the school well established. And and in this committee and in this group of friends, we said that if, apart from just a survey and there being another number of names, it would be good if we could give some of these parents just a morning that they could go to the dentist or do whatever they needed to do. And that's how the nucleus of the care group started. And because I was we were attending Baptist Church as a family and were quite involved, I asked, was there a possibility of using the hall? And they took it to the church committee, and yes, we were allowed to use the hall. This happened in conjunction with the parents, the older parents, still going through the department, having many meetings with the Intellectual Handicap Services Department then, to look beyond that at some respite, permanent accommodation as they were getting older. And so that was the beginning of the care group, which was called.
Was there any respite before that group started? And was that the core of the meeting itself, to just become just for respite, also overnight accommodation? And you mentioned that other part of the
I said there was, well, I don't know what year that started.
That would have started about 1987 when they got Orchard House.
Oh, yes, but I think, Kerry, do you mean the parents who had children with a disability? When, say, Ashley first started school, there was not any respite situation there at all, was it?
No.
So that was, I'm suggesting that was the reason why, as parents, you all got together.
Well, it was mainly just, Pam and I mainly came in on it because our sons had a service that they were going to be able to go to straight from school, the training centre of Endeavour. But because we were concerned for them and had been in the mothers group and a lot of volunteer work at the school, we were very supportive of what they were trying to do. And as we went to some of the meetings, and then were asked to be on the committee, and I sort of thought, well, maybe we could start this, because in the meantime we had a couple of calls from parents who had rung Endeavour that might have needed to. One was a sister looking after her own sister, and she needed to get to a dentist and she hadn't been able to. And so these calls were coming in through Endeavour, but they didn't have anything that they could help with. And in the meantime, the parents of that age group were also.
What age group are we talking about?
They would have been in their 40s, 50s, on. The parents would have been in their 70s, probably.
So Spiral itself, so after the Baptist church you moved, or you were to Image Flat Road, there was land?
No, before Image Flat Road, Spiral had an office opposite the Nambour High School for quite a few years. We operated Spiral from there.
And was that donated, that office?
No.
They would have paid rent. I don't know. I was not in it. I was not involved at that stage.
I think Spiral got enough funds to be able to rent that house and have a full-time coordinator.
How many families do you think were involved at that stage, roughly? Any ideas?
I'd say it's a bit of a... I was not involved then because what happened a little bit in between that, if I can go back, from the pressure the parents and we going to and the committee going to the politicians, it was decided, and we started this care group down at the hall. No office or anything. It was just some things done from the spare bedroom. And so that became the core of the focus then, and the department had to be involved in that. And that's what this actually was, a contract between the department and our care group. And consequently, from that, the department probably would have been going for, I'm not quite sure, this was there was a date on there, wasn't there, that I said? But anyway, it was going for quite a while, and the other things were proceeding, right? So with that then, Di Wallace, who was heading up the intellectual handicap services in Brisbane, she said to us one day we're going to start a satellite office from the health department, intellectual handicap services, and it would be based in an old house in Image Flat Road, an old house owned by the hospital. So they set up this satellite office in this old house, 3-bedroom house there along where Spiral now is. And they were bringing up, there was a main officer in charge. There was a lady who was called a liaison officer. There was going to be a clerk. There was going to be 2 residential program officers, they called them. They wouldn't be in residence, but that was their training. And there'd be there were 2 officers. There was a receptionist and an office clerk. And a psychologist came along as the first head of that small satellite office. And another position was called community health aide. And our fellow was then in Endeavour training centre by then, and I was more free, and so we had already been running this group, and then when the office started I applied for this health position, community health aide, and because I've been doing it, and it was just doing what we're doing, so we continued with the residential program officers then working with us. We were able to extend the Spiral days, not only in the hall at the Baptist Church, but we more extended it to out in the community. We might focus on the one that lived up at Noosa Way, and we do a picnic type activity day up there. And so that's where the actual Spiral is now. And I don't even know, and you'd have to ask Heather this, I don't know when or how it went from being an old house to the magnificent structure they have now, with the department still running Orchard House, which is a respite, and I don't know anything about that in these last years. Mm-hmm. It is sort of the property is separated.
From humble beginnings.
Hmm.
The programs. I'm interested to get your views on the changes that you've seen with the earlier programs as to now what's being offered.
Mind-boggling.
Yes.
Pam, can you put something in there? The ones that we concentrated on were actually just being cared for at home. And beyond school, some had the advantage of didn't have a school, but some lived in the farming communities. And really, it would be one of the first time they would have been without their parents in an environment, in a care environment, So it was really early days. But the department sent up someone when we began, 2 staff members to help us, teach us how to lift that wheelchair to no lifts in those days, I might add, to the bus or whatever, and to general ideas keep an eye on us for the program. Now this continued, from memory, something like they'd come up once a fortnight to our day, and then they'd come up once a month, and they weaned us off to it's 3 months, knowing that we could call them if we needed. And they'd come along, I've arranged a specific training session that they would bring up staff from Brisbane, and we would have a little training morning.
Pam, possibly what would be one of the best programs that you've experienced?
Before Spiral had probably an office and a base to work from, when we were still at the Baptist Church Hall, used to run some lovely days there. We had a lady used to come in and do a music program, and every week she'd come in and we'd have like a cowboy day, and we'd do all cowboy songs. Have country and western, and even an army day, and that was absolutely wonderful. We had so much fun, had some lovely volunteers.
Mm. The volunteers were excellent. We put an ad in the paper, a little article about it, and then I also went round to the ladies' groups, church groups, and explained what the reason we were doing this and how it was working. And at about this time, right at the beginning, the lady who was the Uniting Church Minister's wife had been involved always in children's programs and in missionary programs. They had worked over in New Guinea. She took on the role of the program coordinator, and she was good, and these other things then worked through from that. And Pam had friends that were very, I mean, I might be hopeless at music and these sort of things. So it just happened, didn't it, Pam?
Yeah, it just continued on each week, and I had some really lovely days.
Any obstacles that you can remember that you might want to talk and share with us?
I can remember one lovely lady, volunteer lady we had working with us, used to go and pick up one disabled man, and he used to put something over his head all the way into the group, and she'd be driving along, and here's this fellow sitting in the car with an item of clothing over his head, and we always laughed about that.
Yes, there've been situations according to their need, according to their disability too, and so you just simply, I guess, just being parents of a person with special needs ourselves, you kind of fell into it really, and you just cope with it. I remember going, and this was at the school, but I can remember there was a lady who was a trained nurse, and she had a severely disabled son, and she was then working at the school where her son attended at Sylvania. And one day I went to see her about something, and I called out. They said, "Yeah, I checked with the head teacher. Yes, go along." And I said, Roz, she said, I'm in my office. And I knew what she meant. The office was the toilet. That was where she was working, and it was just these sort of things. You really had a lovely rapport with each other.
You had to have a good sense of humour.
Absolutely agree. Just as a parent of a supposed normal child, parenting itself is a challenge on any level.
You all always rallied together when there was a serious event.
Can you remember one in specific that you'd like to share?
Pam worked with a family that were down beyond Forest Lane, and that was in the days when it developed in-home care. And those children, those adults by then, were quite needed a lot of support, more or less bedridden support, and they would then have to have some times in hospital, and just the parents just appreciated the support.
They were just so grateful to be able to go off shopping together. Just a simple day out while we were there looking after their children or their adults.
Pam always says they pampered us, was Pam's word a little while ago when I was talking about this happening today. And I knew what she meant. I mean, the first Christmas after starting this group, or with the next first few years, they were determined to put on a Christmas party for us. On that Friday, we normally have the activity. We have never seen so much food or been spoilt so much in our lives, and it just showed you how much it's meant to them. Yeah, or that you turn up at the hospital. Yeah.
I don't think I've clarified exactly what your role was, both of you.
Well,
Which day?
So no,
Joan was very much involved in getting it all established, and because I was her friend, I ended up being along each time as a volunteer.
And Pam had incredible training at Sylvania School with all the things she'd helped with there.
I was a volunteer at the school for many years on a weekly basis, and working with the teachers there, they taught you a lot. As a parent, they taught me a lot. Patience, and their dedication was absolutely wonderful.
Were a lot of the teachers paid, or were they also volunteers?
They were all paid, but there were other people there as volunteers.
That was at the Sylvania School.
Before Spiral.
And if they weren't able to go into then what was, in our old terms, shelter workshop or training centre, then that was where all this had to be worked on a lot more. And the parents were instrumental in doing that. And with their good friends. Gordon Simpson, as I said, was a local member. Well, his secretary lived at Palmwoods near one of these families, very good friends with the family. She was Gordon Simpson's secretary. So you just grew like that. You had these people who had these abilities and these skills, and they formed the committee. Joyce Walden, who was president of Endeavour for a long time and kept wanting something to happen, and she was very, very vocal and very competent at going to politicians and voicing the need.
So Spiral is an acronym for?
Yes, well, it's Sunshine Coast Committee for the Care. This one, we might explain that because we, how can I explain it? In the early days we wanted Spiral to be, and we had a little circle going up, so that we wanted things to be improving. Now, we used the word spiral, which then led us to, what can we put there, severely, profoundly, intellectually. We didn't like the word, any of us, retarded, but it was the word that was used in America, but it was the word that fitted in with the spiral of going up. So it was actually, the first constitution would have been that. But then as it grew and as others came in and things certainly, it then became, whatever it is now, supporting people in, is it respite and...
Lifestyle.
Lifestyle, yeah. I mean, I'd have to go officially now, Brad is there. I mean, you should. It's on. But that's how. So thankfully, that transcended. You know, there were improvements. We started from nothing, as it were, and worked through, and then yeah.
Yeah, language is important. And originally, you were saying the government was calling its department the sub.
Well, no, that was
Endeavour.
Subnormal children. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And that was never sat very kindly with us as parents either. But this was a contract that we originally had for the thing, and it says, Special Needs Special Care Group, Sunshine Coast Committee for the Care of Severely and Profoundly Intellectually Handicapped, and Intellectual Handicap Services, which was an improvement even from the earlier days.
So we'll just stick with the programs for the moment. I'm just curious what programs today are Brad and Trevor being...
Brad, Ashley.
Sorry. Ashley, are attending.
Ashley lives in a cerebral palsy residential, and he goes off to the Endeavour Business Service each day.
And then Bradley became quite unsettled at Endeavour a couple of years ago, and I think the bigger workshop, they're just different personalities, didn't suit, and he just really was very unhappy about going. So working with the training officer from Endeavour, who worked with him, we kept him there for another 9 months, but then it was, he just didn't... I don't think it'll hurt it, Pam. Sorry. But anyway, so with that then, Peter Farnham, who was one of the residential program officers originally, became, by that time, when he left working with the department after some years, became the headed up Inclusion Plus, which was a service provider. See, many of the different service providers started working in the area. One area, along with this one, which we were doing adults, working with adults, there was also a group really pushing for younger services and better services for the ones who needed high needs, that special education at that time was not able to meet their needs. And so there were the two groups, and they did try to combine at one stage, but it just was such a different age group that their needs were different to the area we were working in. So Peter headed up that group, Inclusion Plus, and went on and finished up, only retiring at 68 last year, and having worked in that area. And I went to have it, because we kept in touch, and when Bradley was not going to Endeavour, and he said, go back to Spiral. Go and have a chat to Spiral, Joan. And I sort of must have just looked at him, and he said, they have so many programs. So that's what I did. And now he has two what they call community-funded days, which is partial funding. Brad pays a partial fee and partially funded. And he's really settled in well there.
And the activities are?
Cooking days, mainly that day. Tuesday, for instance, is what they call a men's social day. And they'll do cooking quite often, or they might go to a park and have a barbecue and a game of cricket, or they might go to the movies. And so that's Tuesday. But Friday is more of a core cooking group called Garden to Plate. So they have a lot of gardens now up there, raised gardens that they can grow herbs and various other things, cherry tomatoes, etc. And so they pick what they can there and incorporate it in their cooking. And that then is then the Friday group.
Some of the earlier programs, can we go back to those? I was still sticking with Spiral. If you could talk about those early programs that were started, and maybe the climate of other people as well, like how they were responding to those programs in the wider community.
Those we had as volunteers were excellent, and they didn't have a background in disability at all, and we were just blown away with their compassion and their ability to cope with the care situations. One volunteer said that she didn't feel that she could handle it. I said, that's fine. And she went off into doing, in other areas. And so it was entirely whether they felt comfortable in the situation. And they were just, as Pam said, precious. I might also say at this time that Pam's farm was also a very good resource, because we had days out there.
I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, just lots of picnic days.
Or theme days, remember?
Yes, dress-up days, and some of the volunteers had put on a little bit of a concert. And sometimes we invited other people to come along. I could remember one gentleman coming along and playing a saxophone for us. Had lots of fun like that. Another outing day we had, there were some people that owned a lovely boat, and we ended up at the Cod Hole, and those people took everyone, all the disabled people, for a ride in their boat.
Was transport an issue?
Yes, transport was an issue because that was the days before we had a little bus. We all used to use our own cars. But I think most people were happy to do that. It was probably only one day a week.
How's life changed since you've been acquired the bus?
Well, what happened in that regard is that the department alerted us to the fact that we should be able to get a TAFE grant. And I thought, truly? And because we were doing a program that included trying to encourage skills, and certainly even social skills, and being with people that they were not terribly used to. And so we went for the TAFE grant. And I can't remember exactly whether this bus funding became, whether it was through that funding or whether there was some other funding that the committee had been able to go for. And we got this, no, I don't want a bus. No, I don't want the responsibility of a bus. And we've got the bus. So we all got it. Well, most of us got our licence. And we were doing this little bus thing. And that was, increased the ability to do things. By then, probably too, the office with the residential program officers was established. And we were doing program days in conjunction with the office.
So residential, talk to me.
That was their classification when they came from their training, was a residential program officer. That was their training through TAFE. I think it would have been through TAFE. And they then, we could extend the days to the families. And there were two residential program officers, Peter and another lass, Linda. And working from the department's office, I was a community health aide by that time, so that we were the nucleus of those programs. But they were in essence still the Spiral days. So we still had volunteers on deck. And we just used a different type of, we had the bus, so we'd do a pickup, as I said before, maybe have a day at Noosa, maybe have a day up at Kenilworth Way, and that's what the bus let us do. We did different things, and that group was very good because you were always talking to each other, but you're also talking to those with the disability, which was a pretty good experience for them. something I thought of before. But it's gone. It was to do with the bus, how we had this bus, and actually, it was quite funny. But it was one of the program officers, the younger Linda, and she was she was really a lovely girl, and she was just so sure she'd driven for years and she was fine. So we had to get an extra licence, didn't we? And off she went. No, she didn't need to read the instructions. And she came back into the office after going down, and she said, "How'd you get on?" She said, "What's a prime mover?" And one of the questions was about how close could a prime mover park in a town area. Glad that wasn't on my question sheet, but we laughed because then she thought she'd better look at the real book a bit before she went for the next test. Wasn't anything to do with the driving. And these sort of things came, and you really had a good chuckle.
Because things have changed. It was a lot easier to get licences, and there weren't so many rules and regulations back in the beginning days.
No, this was just a straight test. I might also add that we also ventured into organising some camps for a weekend, because we had known the folks at Mapleton Holiday Centre, and Bradley still works there for 3 hours with a support worker. The staff were very supportive, so we'd book a weekend just like any other group would, and they were very open. I mean, a lot of disability groups and craft groups use this facility there when it's available, as well as their normal conference groups and school groups most weeks. And with that then, you'll smile at this, the lady from Kenilworth who looked after her sister on a little farm had a few goats that were rather precious to her. And when we were organising this camp, she didn't think Ray would settle without her there. So that was all right. So we said, yes, she could come. That would have been lovely. And the next question was, can I bring the youngest goat with me? No, not really. But we did have a Christmas play, and the goat played the part of the lamb. So it was that was not all at the one time. But you know that we had one fellow that was very, very crippled up and in a wheelchair. Thankfully not a very big fellow. But we got him into the pool at Mapleton Holiday Centre, and his mother looked at us and said he had never been in a swimming pool in his life.
Beautiful.
So these are the little instances that have just made things rather special.
My role was our daughter had been in the Lions Miss Personality, so we'd done a lot of fundraising. So some of the people at Spiral thought, well, I could be useful for raising funds, so that's part of the role that I had at one stage. We raised a lot of money, and I think some of that money helped run the bus.
Most definitely.
Yes. We needed funds to run the bus.
So what kind of craft activities?
Well, it wasn't actually craft. We sold a lot of craft, probably. We had street stalls, but we had quite a few fashion parades and raised quite a bit of money.
So, and some of your other roles within Spiral, other than fundraising?
Volunteer.
Well, we were all volunteers for the first 6 years, and then we got funds, I think, that come from HAC, and that paid some of us for doing the work that we were doing voluntary, like working on the bus, doing the bus pickup and running the days that we had there.
What about your in-home care? You did more of that.
Yes, and then that came along. Funds came along that we could go into the homes and be with the disabled people while their parents went out shopping or to the doctor or whatever they had to do.
So 6 years is a long time to volunteer before you get paid.
I don't know. We were volunteers.
Yeah.
So, and
That was our training.
Yeah. There was a lot of volunteers.
And Pam continued years after I needed to go back to doing just a little bit of office work from the spare bedroom. This family had both a son and a daughter, more or less. Both were bedridden, and so that was in-home care. These ladies did. 2 ladies went down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There were lots of other people that needed that service as well.
Mm.
And you'd hear about they would ring up for help.
They were more on set days, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
I probably did the week's program and sent the carers out to all the different homes.
Like the liaison officer.
Yeah.
Something between you two, a moment would be great to share.
Oh, look, I can think of one, and Pam will probably kick me in the shins.
I know it's going to be.
Pam, I usually started off with the bus because I was in town here, and it was either at our house or at the office. One Spiral had an office. And this day I needed to go a bit earlier than usual in what we were doing, and I had to come back into the office. So I rang Pam up and I was to meet her at Yandina. That was fine. So we did this. She still had her hair in curlers with this lovely scarf over it, see? And I said to her on the way in, I said, I have to go to the office first, Pam, to pick up some stuff. And when we got to the office, I said, my parking area in the trees, I think some of them are still there. And I said, you want to sit and wait here? Because Pam had been so much a part of the office anyway. Or we'd like to come up and have a chat while I get a bit of the gear ready. And Pam carefully takes the scarf off and combs the hair and gets all ready to get out of the car. She had barely stepped out of the car, and this magpie in the tree above just approached. And it was just sort of, it was one of those times where, oh, she said, and I said, and I just started laughing. I'm sorry, but it just was.
I think I was just a volunteer that day. Joan had to do the bus pickup right up at Noosa to Wanton, and she didn't have a helper, and so that's how I come to be there with my hair and rollers.
And thankfully, because it was still in this old house, it had a pretty good bathroom. So Pam was washing her hair before we went out, and not in rollers. But it was there's other things. We stopped off at Kenilworth one day on the way back where they were selling watermelons.
Yes.
We had these round watermelons rolling down the bus, and please someone put their foot on them, And then I can see another volunteer lady who was good friend of Pam's, she's since passed away, and she had a little nursery at home, and we stopped at these toilets somewhere between here and Kenilworth, picnic area, and the next thing she's climbing up on the railing. I said, what are you doing? And there was a little tree that had started growing in the gutter above the toilet, in the toilet roof. So she was getting this little tree down so she could take it home and grow it. And we just had it was an incredible, really special times. Incredibly, and I think that was the main thing that I can remember saying, that these families became such special friends, that it was a privilege to work with them. It really was.
Yeah.
And we, what else? That's what Pam had sort of felt too, and as I said, so I don't know.
I just wanted to touch on briefly if there was, in terms of medicating, today, they use Ritalin quite a lot and other things for ADHD, diagnosed children, which is not so much a physical, well, it can be. I'm just wondering if there was any medication in those early days, or now even, that they're recommending. if you've seen any changes. How that
Medically,
makes you feel.
I wouldn't have much experience except is in a whole row and what we've been. You go to the doctor when there's this happening. With Bradley and say Pam would be the same, but medically we weren't required to go to the extent now. I mean, even it seems strange, but I can't really remember medically needing, apart from having to do our first aid and all of those requirements, and being on deck for those situations. I can't really think that we learned how to handle a seizure, epileptic seizure, in the first aid situation, and I can't really remember us needing to do anything medically other than care.
We did do first aid training later on with Spiral. I can remember doing it a couple of different times.
So that would have to be a qualification that people need now to work
Yes.
with Spiral. What other qualifications that you know of are required today that maybe weren't then?
Well, I don't know because we're not in that care situation.
I think they like people to do the disability course at TAFE.
What about back in the early days then?
We were guided by those, once the office was set up, we were guided by those who, as I referred to before, were called residential program officers. And, another lady who became one of she was an occupational therapist and partially physiotherapist. So they were there. We were just...
I just thought of something I would like to ask you. Sorry about that. The Special Olympics. Please tell me a story about that, how it came about.
This lady here, part first.
What year was it to start with? Set me the scene.
Well, I think there was a group that started off, probably would have been 1987, 88, and we just had a little swimming club until some people from the Special Olympics came up and got us to join Special Olympics.
Pam's son and other children had been in the swimming club. Pam said they're trying to compete in a younger age group and it's not sort of as good, and we'll start a special swimming club. So Pam, before she heard of Special Olympics, started a special swimming club.
It was another mother and myself. The other mother's son went to Sydney to do to be in. I think it might have been Special Olympics in Sydney. And when she came home, she said, "Oh, I met this lady from Western Australia. They've got a special swimming group. How about we get one started?" So that's how it happened. And we started that special swimming group at Maroochydore.
And from her contact there, we learnt that there was a region at the Gold Coast, a Special Olympics region. And was there one at Brisbane North? I don't think so at that stage. And so these came up and we had a public meeting again, and it was presented to those of us who had children or young adults in this age group, and it started with the swimming club. And so instead of becoming just the special swimming club, it became Special Olympics swimming.
It was Sue Creeley that came up and met us at it met all of us mothers at Joan's
and also,
place.
And that's how that started. So in a way, it was the nucleus of us parents who had people with disabilities, sons or daughters, and then we learnt all about Special Olympics and started a region. What position did you have, Pam, then? Something, it would have been something. We were all pretty small, same nucleus.
Just being a
and then
parent and helping out.
Yeah, and in 6 months after we started, they let us know that there was going to be what they called then state games in Brisbane, and there'd be gymnastics, and there'd be swimming, and there'd be riding. Was there There were a few other sports, not many then. And so Bradley, amazingly, had been from school. This again, we go back to before this. There was a lady helping at Sylvania School, apart from not any connection with us, who was a gym coach here, and she was helping with the physical programs that they were running at school. From that, she suggested there could be a special gymnastic club, not Special Olympics. She was ahead of her time. And so we got this little group together. It was no gym hall. They had to get the equipment out down at the showgrounds. And we went round and gathered from this residential and that residential, and we gathered up about 4 or 5. And from that, we kept that going quite a while. And different ones from the community then came on too. And we then from that, Bradley started at the training centre, and the class he was in, or for one reason or another, that class dissolved. People weren't able to come to that, those with the disability. In the meantime, then Bradley had joined the normal gymnastic club, because on her recommendation and her encouragement. And so then when the Special Olympics got going, they said, and gymnastics is one. Remember, Bradley did gymnastics, and he did 4 years of gymnastics. And so he tried out in gymnastics, and we went to the competition in Melbourne and then over to America, and came back, and we still had our Special Olympics going here, and many different sports then. 10-pin is very popular. They've got cricket going. I'm not involved in that. Unfortunately, gymnastics is not going now because our guys are older. But, this is how it's grown. It's grown from families that are in this situation. The better, and then the more involved families are, the better the organisation. But unfortunately, I think it's a bit depleted in that regard now. We're not involved in the running of Special O anymore, or involved in committees or anything. We're beyond that.
Our sons are still
our
participating, and we go along because
we go along.
That's how they get there.
And you help when there's a regional competition, and it's at your place, and it's
a wonderful program for our sons and daughters to be involved in.
Tennis was one of the newer ones we started. Pam used to play tennis. We started tennis. It's still going, I think, isn't it, Pam?
Yeah.
Guys aren't there. So,
up some medication. He's had a few problems recently, and other than that, he's never ever had any. Maybe.
Yeah, well, that leads me to now. I was thinking of this area. They were physically pretty well in these days. Our fellow, older Down syndrome have been medically said that they would age sooner and be of Alzheimer's developing sooner. Now, this has been sort of there in the back of your mind, I suppose, but and I remember going to a lecture, Pam and I. There's another thing we did. Went to a international Down syndrome conference in Sydney some years ago, and they had and we took our Bradley and Ashley. They had programs specifically for the disabled folk that were there, the Down syndrome folk, young people that were there, and then we could choose our electives of what we went to. One I chose was medical, and there's a professor from America, and he said a lot of people think they're in their 40s or 50s. They get withdrawn, or they get different sort of behaviours, and he said, I think you've got to look beyond that and see whether it is perhaps an aged parent has passed away, or there's some other disturbance in their life that has affected them. And I came home thinking, I have to worry about Alzheimer's. But Bradley has definitely changed in the last 2 years. His needs, that's why he's now at Spiral, because his needs are different. He is showing signs, and the specialist just a month, probably would be not even quite a month, saying yes, that he had a lot of experience with Down syndrome people, mainly in Melbourne, but in both community, home with their parents, and in the residential and community. And yes, medically, and the medical statement is there as well, that the area of brain that's affected by the chromosome imbalance is also more susceptible, not necessarily, but more susceptible to being covered by the chemicals, and then they could then show signs of Alzheimer's. And we're finding Brad is becoming more set behaviours, really set behaviours, wanting things in certain places and certain handhelds and certain, yes, these sort of things. So it's a new journey for us. And Dashy's a bit older, and Dashy's been really, really good.
He's showing different behaviour patterns now, just probably in the last 12 months.
Mm. So it's not going to come at any specific age, but they're saying that that's what...
And there's not a lot you can do for Alzheimer's.
No. And thankfully, and this is where we're still different, whether we've got Alzheimer's or we're still very different in personality. And Ashley is very happy to still be in the residential and go to Endeavour each day. And hopefully, there was some concern we felt when Bradley left, not a criticism, but an acknowledgement for Bradley situation, that he just was not happy in that big workshop situation where so many different people had different ability levels, and yet Ashley's quite happy in that situation still, and it's great. And I hope Endeavour themselves might, and I think when NDIS come as this wonderful thing, might then develop some new programs that would sort of accommodate those that are going into early stages. But these are early days, and again, it's a journey for us, because Brad has lived at home, and we've been able to do a lot with the others that have been living in hostels, provided transport and caring situations. But he's chosen to do that. He's done very well, and he probably wouldn't have been able to do the sporting things he has without more individual support. But for us it's different, because he's more comfortable with older people, just like these ones would have that we started working with then.
Spiral was basically for adults.
Yeah.
People with disabilities. So in that role that you were just describing, the future of Spiral on
could
some
be
level.
And so, but Bradley doesn't take kindly. He would accept someone coming and staying overnight, and we would go away for 1 night or 2 in a year. But he's even sort of, not happy about that and not settled. Has happened only in the last 6 months for 1 night, and before that for not a long time. And so this is where we're the difference. So our journey now is that we found out through Colin, who has the Aged Carers program, she's coordinator in Equity Works, that we have been able, and it's in the process of, apply through Disability Services for an ACAT assessment for Brad on a needs basis, but not an age basis. And if it comes through disability, then he won't lose his community days. Whereas I was concerned that if we went through an ACAT assessment through aged care, which he would also be perhaps eligible because of his needs, that it then would be classed that he was then in aged care, and then more programs that are suitable for his age group, even with his needs, wouldn't be possible. But so this is encouragement we've got now, and it's letters gone into the department, waiting for word back, and the specialist letter acknowledging this, and that if we could get an ACAT and there's a hostel right in the middle of here, that Bradley might accept that better than he would in the group home where Ashley's quite...
Are there many other families in the same position?
I suppose there are.
You don't know them.
But no, I guess you just find whichever is going to be the best situation. There have been some that one fellow that was in the residential that Ashley is in, and he developed Alzheimer's, and then because Endeavour couldn't accommodate him at the workshop, then they were from Glasshouse, well then he needed to go back home, and I think, Pam, he finished up in a nursing home too, didn't he? Yeah. So this is it, you need to find the path that is any sort of a possibility, but it's been a journey for us for almost 2 years, a very absorbing journey. Absolutely. And emotionally draining journey.
And heartwarming as well.
Oh yes, yeah, and we get the support from here. We've been able to, because we're caring for a person with disability, get some home care through Sundale, which will be able to be increased a little now that Brad's needs have increased. And that's what we're hoping it'd head to. I mean, we couldn't be here because he'd come down and find us, but we'll work with that. We'll work through how we can work it. But it's a start, and we'll see how we go there, because, again, Colleen had tried to do... They have a residential, not a residential but respite, in Nambour, the Equity Works group, and they take all ages there at different times. We're getting them at the same age. Bradley, we tried that. Wouldn't or as it was set foot in the door. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but it's just how he's home. You'll be there. You'll be there.
With Spiral, is there an age where they cut off support?
I don't know. I haven't seen. This is a new Spiral, if you like, that I'm dealing with now as a carer, aged carer, and the services. So,
journey.
And Brad's accepted a transport pickup, and that's great. So those things he gets confident with, and people he's confident with, he's okay. But he's withdrawing from people he doesn't know well or hasn't seen for a long time.
So, is there anything else you'd like to share together about your time growing up, I suppose, together in Spiral?
I think not only with Spiral, but being parents, you build up a really big bond with all the other parents. That's what I've found. The other parents are very special to you.
I think too that might be even more so within the age group we have gone through these experiences together, whereas now there are so many more even respite service or support services that are there. And I know that Sundale are into low-cost housing. It's another avenue they've gone into. So many different... I used to say, well, what you just did so well, do so well. But anyway, so be it. It's become a big concern, and had lots of things in various places, baskets. And there was a lady in one of those areas that thought Bradley might be suitable for community living, and she came and explained about the low-cost housing, and they might set up with one or two others. And she said to me, having gone through that with us, and we looked at each other knowing that our journey had already started in this last 2 years very differently, that we couldn't see that being a possibility. But I said to her, when, she was explaining how some if they built some, like the Habitat that's near Sundale now, I believe, some would be professional units and professional people would live in them and pay a full rent, and others would be available as low income, and they would have some subsidised sort of a lower rental, and then I said to her, it's very good. It's very good for some. And I said, you haven't mentioned a care component in this plan. And she said, oh no, you just use the funding you've got now. Well, because that was not her experience. See, she was trying to open up to being open then to people with disabilities. But we were, as I often say, old school. The funding that came, and it comes for Ashley, but came for Bradley while he was at the supported employment, which is what the services are called, the same, whether it's run by Red Cross or all over Australia, AEDCs I think they're called. The disability services fund through Endeavour. They fund the person individually, but only through Endeavour as a supported employee. And if that person is not a supported employee anymore, then that funding ceases. And then they let the disability services know, yes, this person is not now in supported employment. So consequently...
Did the families, just out of curiosity, did the families pay for the support in Spiral earlier when they came to the programs?
Not in the very early stages. It was a care group. Mm-hmm. Just a care support group.
Until when?
I don't know, because that would be beyond... See, I left when the office was still doing the combined days, and I actually... No, I don't think so.
I think some user pay came in while I was still there. I wasn't involved in it, so I'm not sure about it.
When did you finish?
Probably 2003.
And you yourself?
Oh,
Joan?
goodness. It would have been in the early 1980s, I think, that I actually pulled out of on-hands work. Pony continued longer because he became redundant in his position, and yes, worked with the group.
You were there a long time.
Oh yes, Pam was there.
You've seen a lot of changes.
Yes.
What was the most significant change, do you think?
I think it was just really good seeing the increased funding as it happened, that they were able to provide more support for people.
Sorry, I'm wrong on that date. I just took a guide from that, and the care stay only started in 1982. So I would have got a lot longer. All I know is that my father was in his early 80s. Now I'd have to do a bit of mathematical sum to work that out. But yes, when his health failed in the early 80s, I then pulled out of the hands-on. And see, I was not involved when I went there for some things, but when the house was rented down opposite the high school. Pam mentioned
as the funding was increased, they were able to rent premises to run from, and it was a house down opposite the Nambour High School, and then Disability Services moved out of Image Flat Road, so Spiral moved into the old offices of Image Flat Road.
And been there ever since?
Yes, built a new building, pulled it down and built a new building there, which is wonderful.
And Heather would be the one who could explain where that was funded and how it was funded, because, whether they're leasing the land and own the building or whatever with the department, I don't know.
So, Pam, your role there during that time was, we're saying liaison officer, weren't we?
No, that was in the early days before we went to the house on Coronation Street. We got a full-time coordinator then. Joan was the coordinator for a little while.
Yeah, I don't think I worked from the house there.
You worked from home?
I worked from home. I did the office work at home,
And then we got Linda.
Yeah, near Linda. Yeah.
Linda as a full-time coordinator.
So Linda was the residential program officer and dipped over then to coordinator of Spiral from the public service.
And it just went on from there.
What went
With
on from
different-
there?
well-
What did you do?
Well, I was just one of the workers then,
In home
paid
care.
workers. I didn't have any important role. Just didn't hold office or anything like that. Just
Oh, there's a president's picture
so
on the president's
bad.
list.
doing hands-on work.
At that point, I might show you a picture.
One of my favourite days was going to Sundale with a lady that we took every Friday, and I met up with a volunteer that came along to help me, and we're still great friends now, and that was a lovely day.
What sort of things did you do?
Well, just had the disabled lady in the pool at Sundale,
Yes,
where
yeah.
I go to now myself. And, and meeting up with the other workers. We'd all meet in a place and have lunch together. They were lovely days. I love working for Spiral.
It was a special time in life. It was a privilege. You talk about being volunteer, but it was a privilege
It's very
as well.
hard to give it up.
I bet. I don't think you ever will. I think it's in your heart forever by the sound.
One family we worked with, their daughter, she took seizures fairly often, but thankfully not terribly severe. And they were quite elderly. And I think I was working at the department then, and so with their guidance and support, not mine, but they were able to get this lass into multicap in Brisbane, which is now not only in Brisbane. I think they have an office up here somewhere, but a residential down there. And many months later, I met the dad down shopping one day, and he looked at me and he said, look, they bring her up. I was once a month and we have this time with her, and she's so settled there. And I just thank you so much, you people, for being able to organise that. And I'm sort of looking at him and thinking, well, I don't know if I had too much to do with it, but parting with your child that you looked after, who she probably would have been in her maybe 50s then, maybe, to going to Brisbane, and yet that family accepted that. Yeah. Those things are very, very special, you know.
Yes, yes.
Or this mother telling you that her son, who was all of 50, had never been in a swimming pool. And Peter just took him in. Yeah. And, we had some amazing times, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the camp you had up at Lake Koroiba?
Yeah. And we had cane toads put in with our shower, but not the disabilities people, but us helpers had a cane toad put in with our shower. Come on. I remember the time, it was also a special thing, we were having this party, and one of the parents, I think it was, put those fake cockroaches into our cordial drinks on the table.
That'd
They were
be
little
Jan.
plastic things. Jan. And
That would be Jan.
And Patsy, who was a lady who was, and she was going along to this glass, and she said, she said, "These dry things doing in here," and Jan's just standing there like this, Jan was a precious volunteer lady. And another thing Jan did, she had this real-looking frog. I've never seen a frog look so real. And she had them all believing this was a frog, beautiful coloured sculptured frog. And she even had my dad. My dad used to come down with me often then, before he was too sick. And he was sort of there looking at this frog and being very gentle with it, And of course Jan's in there bursting to say something. But you don't see, some people, you don't see their abilities, and it's as much as you should, you can. Like, we had one lass was autistic, which was the term used more often then in those days. And we used to always make them, as they could, set the table for their luncheon down at this care group. And anyway, she came into the kitchen and I said, bread and butter plates, you put them on the table, but I don't know how many there are. She literally ran her fingers up the side of those stacked dishes and she said, 8, or whatever it was. And I looked at her and she walked out of the kitchen and I went along and I went 1, 2, 3, 4, and the exact number. And Dr. Tony Atwood, he became Dr. Tony Atwood, he was doctor, became our first officer in charge of it there. I forget what his real designation was, but anyway, he had come out from England and he was very interested. He had a sister over there who had autism, and he said she was she loved trains, brilliant in drawing trains and things like that, so he'd had that family experience as well, but he was very interested. He became a very great acknowledged specialist down in Brisbane now in that area. And but you know, you just sort of I think it was good training for him up here too in this office, because you just learn so much of the personal side and the acknowledging people's abilities or different personalities, and you just grew with it. That was about it.
One funny incident was at one of our group days at the Baptist Church Hall, and Dr. Tony was there taking all the photos, and then suddenly he realised there wasn't a film in the camera.
And of course, you know, he was a psychologist, the doctor of psychology, and there was some notice up at work, not for him particularly, but it had psychologists need, and I forget what the next word, there was a little slogan, and it was sort of, and someone had written out, psychologists need psychologists. You know? But it was really, yeah.
He was a good sport.
He was. He had a young family and he went off to Brisbane, and I know people have really talked well of him now.
Was it that obvious that the country folk here in Nambour, compared to the Brisbane group, were much more family orientated?
Well, he came to this position. I don't know. I don't think he'd been to any position in Brisbane. He went from here down to do the further work there. Yeah.
He was just new out from
England. He was just new out. Yeah. And so, it's been a very amazing journey as just each thing went, and you know, and I'm a Christian, and as I used to think some days when I was ready to leave home that, oh, look, oh Lord, I don't feel competent to leave this house without knowing your extra care. And there were just things that, you know, maybe you didn't do everything the best you could, but you did the best you could. But whether it was always in the way that it had been done, but we had children that we'd had to care for in many, many ways, and the swimming just went ahead, and
we learned off each other.
We learned off each other and supported each other.
I think that's what that spiral's all about, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm learning. I mean, I don't know a lot of the. I'm only meeting the ones that when I was taking Brad up and picking him up, those in the office, Jazz as she's called, Jasmine, and and appreciating them. But now that Brad's accepting the pickup, then you're meeting that support person that takes him and picks him up, and yeah, it's and I know there's a whole heap of programs I don't know anything about up there.
Okay, I think that's about it. How do you feel, ladies?
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know if there's anything else that we can glean out of here, but it just was, that was it, the way they set up a contract. We actually had a written contract with the department. This one was President's Report, presented in 1986. The birth of the Sunshine Coast Committee for the Care of the Severely and Profoundly Handicapped took place on the 26th of April 1981, at a meeting attended by 50 people in the CWA Hall, Nambour. Today we are at the confirmation of the committee, now known as Spiral. I feel it is important to give you a resume of our 5 years activity, or sometimes inactivity. I didn't write this. At the first meeting which I chaired, this was written by Joyce Walden, Miss Diana Wallace of the Queensland Department of Health told us of the aims and responsibilities of her department. And it just goes on about who was at the meeting. And they took this is interesting, they took a collection to pay for the rent of the hall for that meeting, leaving a credit balance of $1.30. 3 days later, the committee met and following office bearers were selected: Mrs. Joyce Walden, Chairman; Mrs. O. Eastlake, Minutes Secretary; Mrs. J. Vanderfleet, Assistant Secretary; Mrs. M. Hooley, Treasurer, whose husband has worked for many years at Spiral as a volunteer. But I don't think he hasn't been well.
No, he was a paid worker.
He was a paid worker,
He had
was
a
he? There you
job
are.
there for
See,
quite a
this is
few
it. We've got
years.
to bounce off each
He
other.
retired and went back to work.
Oh,
He missed it so much.
so there you are. That's who people have graduated, if you like, or gone on. This meeting started a paper war to the Commonwealth and state governments, which was our only weapon. In July, as a result of the replies received from the government, a request was made to the Department of Health for a needs survey of intellectually handicapped, as it was classed then, on the Sunshine Coast area. 11th of October, a general meeting was held in CWA Hall. Mr. Ahern arranged for Ms. Daines Walden, Coburn and Sinclair to meet with the Minister of Health to request building of a villa on the Sunshine Coast. And that's the next words are: a significant proposal was made by Mrs. Joan Vanderfleet that a day training or care centre be set up, and she would report back to the committee. Joan and I had several trips to IHS in Brisbane, the centre, and the August meeting was held in the Baptist Church Hall. Ms. Diane Wallace of IHS and a coordinator of the day care centres advised their programs, and the help they could provide. The Baptist Church representative said the hall would be available with certain conditions, public risks, etc. Mrs. Vanderfleet then suggested that the care training centre start in February 1982. On the 29th of January 1982, the committee meeting arranged details of the care centre. Joan Vanderfleet was appointed in charge of administration and coordination. IHS arranged to train the volunteers. And it goes on about the training.
So that's where it started. Yeah.
That's the start.
Beautiful. Thank you. That was great reading that out, actually, getting those names.
Well, I was thinking, oh, Pam, you're the historian, I don't know when dates things had happened. And this actually, they presented me with this when I officially retired, with a lot of stuff that is not relevant to Spiral, having a go at me about various things. And anyway, in that was this report, which then I read the other night and thought, oh, I'm glad I found this before you folks were coming, because it goes on about February 1984, is another date. Oh, so first of all, 42 people attended April 1983 meeting, and it just goes on. Mrs. Robin Shepherd, who was the director of IHS.
Right.
Jane was responsible there.
That's lovely. We're actually going to stop it there.
Yeah.
That's all right, Jane.
Yeah.
So I'll just...
Oh,